earth will everything be decided upon in just over a month? Is Boris Johnson posturing here by suggesting that?
To some extent, he's speaking to a domestic audience, but I think the main constraint right now is not on the UK side. I think they are keen to get a deal and get a deal soon. The main constraint is on the European side, right? This is now a second-order problem for Brussels. They're not really too focused on the Brexit negotiations. They're worried about getting out of the Corona lockdown, and they're focused on next-generation EU, the kind of big fiscal stimulus program they're trying to put together over the next few weeks. With the rest of the Eurozone. So the problem is a little bit that the EU is not focused on London at all right now.
So what do you think the timing of the negotiations will be, and when do you think a deal does really need to be done?
Well, so as I said, right, the EU Council summits and trying to get the budget approved for the next 7 years is directly linked to the Brexit negotiations. So I think that the summer is, there'll be technical negotiations between Michel Barnier on the EU side and David Frost on the UK side. But let's be honest, the EU is not going to agree on a budget for the next 7 years until September. So I think this will be kicked into mid-September, early October, late October. And we're going to see a replay of the kind of last few years where this is going to go to the wire.
What will be the sticking points at the very last few paces, Matthias?
Well, it's interesting what you just showed on your news, that Boris Johnson, the things he didn't mention, right? So he talked about fisheries and territorial waters, that was important. I think that's something the EU will cave in on, right? But what he also mentioned was the European Court of Justice. And again, that's, I think, something the EU will cave on. But it will be about level playing field conditions, right? So how much is the UK willing to agree to not lower its labor standards, not lower its environmental standards, so not trying to get a competitive advantage in trade with the EU on some of these issues, because that will be seen as, they want to take back control. They want to have a say over this. And how much is the EU going to be willing to trust the UK going forward, because it is a big market and it's potentially a formidable sort of competitor.
So obviously, the UK has more to lose in some ways than the EU if we do see kind of a no deal emerging, if WTO standards apply. Where do you see the UK being willing and able to negotiate most? What can they give in on, in other words, to get something done that matters?
Yeah, so there's a few things they can do, right? I can imagine them somehow legally figuring out some sort of transition period continuing without calling it that, right? Where there's a lot of kind of sector by sector deals that basically keep the current arrangement in place for longer, with the UK paying some money into the EU budget as a price. That, I think, is less likely. But I think that on level playing field, they're going to have to cave in and say, well, we're not going to lower our standards because we're going it alone now. We're actually going to increase our standards when it comes to the environment, to labor, and all these sorts of things, because I think that will sell well at home. But you're absolutely right. A WTO Brexit is very problematic for the UK, because even if they want to treat goods from the EU at zero tariffs, that means they would have to treat every country in the same fashion. So they would have to have zero tariffs with Canada, with the US, with China, with India, and so on. And that would be a brutally competitive outcome for the British farmers, for British manufacturing, and so on, because it would be very hard for them to compete at this rate.
It's tough talking about a trade deal and about goods going, back and forth through borders and so on, Matthias, in the middle of a pandemic, and nobody really knows when it's going to end or if there are going to be resurgences and so on. How does that complicate things?
Well, massively, right? Because on the one hand, you're adding another blow to an already deeply problematic situation from the economy point of view. The OECD reported that the British economy is in the worst shape of all OECD advanced economies. A 20% fall in GDP in the last month, and in the month of April, sorry. And so here they are, right, in the midst of COVID. But some people, as far as I understand in Westminster, think that this is a huge opportunity, because COVID means a kind of disruption in supply chains anyway. And so they think that almost people won't notice, the British people won't notice, because things are so bad, that things get even worse. And that's, of course, something that's being rejected by British business and by British industry and services.
Is there, though, we think we're sitting here in New York and Toronto, there has been kind of this thought that perhaps this is an opportunity for new trade relationships. On that point, could there be a sort of a shift, other people take advantage of this moment?
Yes, that was part of the vision of the Brexit campaigners of a kind of global Britain, right? It doesn't mean that Britain is turning inwards. It means that it's basically going back to its 19th century tradition where it was trading with the rest of the world and the Commonwealth and all of that. But there is definitely an opportunity for, let's say, the United States to, fill in the vacuum that could have been left by Britain leaving the EU. But again, that will be great for the Americans. It'll be great for pharmaceutical industry. It'll be great for the financial industry. It'll be great for American farmers. It's not clear, however, that British industries or farmers will gain from this. And it's also not clear that that's what the British people want, right? To replace, let's say, French chickens for American chlorine-washed chickens, and you know the debate.